Graham and Sarah will echo everything that I would say about them. It's a wonderful thing to do, but don't you think that it's rather nice that we're able to actually give to other people? Yeah? Some people are nodding, but I'm pleased about that. You know, it's often been said that it's more blessed to give than to receive. If you're a youngster, a child, or whatever, you probably don't think that way. But as you get older, I think there actually is quite a lot in that. I know exactly how much pleasure I get from giving gifts to my children and my grandchildren, and how much joy it actually gives me to see their faces as they open the gift and as they see what's in there. Brenda and I had the wonderful opportunity to go to Moldova a few years ago, which we talked to you about before, I'm sure. And to see the faces of the children as they open their shoeboxes was something to behold. Absolutely tremendous. And the gifts that were given by people just like you, just like us. We're so thankful for all that, and I'm sure the children are too. We've heard stories upon stories, and we've met people who received boxes as children, who have come to know the Lord because of that shoebox, and who have now served within St. Martin's Spurs and elsewhere. And those stories are absolutely wonderful, and those people are absolutely wonderful. It's all because of people like you and people like me doing that. So shoeboxes is a form of giving, isn't it? And I don't quite know why I got led to these particular passages today, but there we are. At this time of the sort of economic cycle, I might suggest that this is perhaps an insensitive thing for me to preach about, but I think the whole idea of giving is something that we probably need to preach about. It's a thing we need to think about. We need to look at it biblically rather than just personally and selfishly, because that's so easy that we should do that. Why do we give? We give often because, exactly what I've just said, we get a real buzz from seeing people open those presents and the smile they have in their faces. And that's not all there is to it, of course. We give because we're Christians and we have received. We have received far more than we could ever give. And that's something which I want to concentrate on as we go along. Now, in the Bible, in the New Testament, there was a particular gift which was made. It was made by the Christians that Paul went to visit in his travels. And the gift was something which he was to take to the Christians in Jerusalem, who at that time were having a hard time of it. I don't know why. If you read the book of Acts, and you know how generous people were when they first became Christians, how they would sell their fields and use the money to support the little group. But it appears that those days were over, and the church in Jerusalem was suffering because of lack of resources. And so it is that Paul organised these collections in the different churches that he went to, with a view that they would be taken by Paul and some others directly to Jerusalem for the relief of the people that were there. The passages that I want to talk about explain how that gift was to be collected, how that gift was to be transported, and as it was received. So first of all, I'd like to have a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 to 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, first 4 verses. I'll leave the tag in there, I might need it later. Now, about the collection for God's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. Here we have a plan that Paul sets forward for organised giving. So giving in the New Testament isn't something that you just stick your hand in your pocket and put it in a bucket somewhere when you see a person collecting. It's something which is planned. And as Paul explains to the Corinthians, he's already told the Galatian churches to do this, and now he's explaining to them that the best way of doing this giving for God's people is that on the first day of each week, presumably that was the Sunday when they came to worship, they made a gift out of what they had received during that week. Their salaries, their work, their other things and everything. It's a regular thing done every week. Or in modern days, it's probably every month. That's sort of every time you get a pay slip, isn't it, usually? I know I get my pension from the government once every 4 weeks, which actually makes planning more difficult because it's a different time every month. But I'm sure many of you can empathise with that. The rest of you, hopefully you will in due course. So yeah, but every time you get your pay slip, you should think, how much of this can I afford to give to the Lord? And you save it up, so that when Paul comes along, you don't need to have a whip round. How often do you go to one of these Christian concerts and things like that? And the first thing they do, one of the things they do halfway through is pass buckets round. That's not the planned giving that Paul is talking about here. Paul is talking about planned giving in proportion to your income, making sure that you don't forget anything. And in that case, no collection should be necessary for this kind of collection. So what happens to it? Well, before we go to what actually happens to it, let's have another passage from 2 Corinthians this time. Another letter which Paul wrote to the Corinthians, and there are several of them, but these two we have written down for us. And I'd like to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 to 12, where Paul is again talking to the Corinthian church about this business of giving. So 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. Out of Macedonia was a bit more than what we don't know and understand as much. The country of Macedonia with its capital in Scotland, a lovely city. It actually, if you can imagine Greece being the top half of Greece, then the Gulf of Corinth, and then the bottom half of Greece. Okay? The bottom half was known as Achaia, and the top half was Macedonia, all of the top half of Greece. So that's the area we're talking about here. The Macedonian churches were part of that. Carry on. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints. And they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then to us in keeping with God's will. So we urged Titus, since he had earlier made the beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But just as you excel in everything, in faith and speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. And here is my advice about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what he does not have. There are several points in that to think about. Firstly, Paul is urging the Corinthian Christians to act in the way that the Macedonian Christians did. They were firstly generous, we see in verse 2. Out of their most trial, they were still generous. They were still prepared to go that way. Even in the poverty which they were experiencing, they regarded it as a privilege to give to the work of the church in Jerusalem. It was a responsibility, but a privilege. And I wonder whether or not we regard it as a privilege, being able to give to the Lord's work. Maybe you do. The evidence is before us and all around us here. But notice this, in verse 5, it doesn't start with your wallet, it starts with your heart. Verse 5, they gave themselves first to the Lord. And if you give yourself first to the Lord, then he will open up your generosity. If you don't give yourself first to the Lord, your wallet will probably remain closed as well. This is something you have to think about, and I have to think about. Secondly, they gave themselves to Paul and his group. They made sure that he was well supported when he was with them. Other places it tells us that Paul didn't take any pay when he was with them. He worked with his own hands as a tent maker and supported himself. But in some places he did take some money from them so that he could continue with the Lord's work when he was amongst them, unencumbered by the need to work through the day as well. And these Christians, secondly, gave themselves to Paul and his group. Notice also that Paul is not commanding them to do anything here. It's an encouragement, not a command. Paul wants to test the sincerity of their love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. Seems a bit dodgy, doesn't it, comparing the amount of giving between one church and another. But that was what Paul was doing here. He was saying, look at this. These Galatian Christians, they've given away so much. And so the Macedonian Christians, they've given away so much, even though they could barely afford it. Now, guys, I want you to do the same. It's an encouragement. It's an encouragement. And Paul points us to the spiritual dimension of this here in verse 9. He says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, though he was prepared for our sakes to become poor." I'm sure you've thought about that many times in your Christian life, particularly at the beginning of your Christian life when you couldn't really understand what Jesus may have done for you. Yeah, he left everything behind him in heaven. He was God. He had everything under his control, and yet he was prepared to put it all to one side and come to earth. And we know the reason why he came to earth. It's there in the cross. That's the reason why he came to earth. He was prepared to give away everything that he had was rightfully his, make himself nothing, and die a criminal's death on the cross, just so that you and I can be related back to God again. Wasn't that wonderful? Faced with that kind of generosity, where are we? Christ gave up his riches to become poor, so that we, through his poverty, can become rich in the spiritual sense. So that's what Paul is doing there. Let's move on a touch. For it's one thing to collect a gift in. It's another thing to make sure that it's properly accounted for and that it gets to where it's supposed to go. Okay? And checks and balances are important here. So let's have a look now over the page in 2 Corinthians 8, starting at verse 16 for a few verses. Where Paul says, "I thank God who put into the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he's coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. And we're sending along with him a brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany us as we carry the offering which we administer in order to honour the Lord himself and to show our eagerness to help. We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift, for we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. In addition, we're sending with them our brother, who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. As for our brothers, they are representatives of the churches and an honour to Christ. Therefore show these men the proof of your love and the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it." Okay. Safety in numbers. This particular case, Paul, I don't know how big the gift is, we've got no idea. Probably quite a lot of money, but we've got no way of knowing that. And he's making sure that it's kept safe. So he's making sure that at least 4 people go in the party deck. That should be enough to deter any bandits that they might meet on the road. Of course, nowadays everything's done by banks, isn't it? It's not through actual cash being transported long distances by unsafe roads. But the point is the same. We all need to be accountable in what we do, first and foremost to God, but we also need to make sure that we're accountable before men as well. And it's the same with Samaritan's Purse shoeboxes. All the gifts that are given are accounted for. We collect them up as we check the boxes. We put them in a secure box while we're doing the job. That all goes unopened to our treasurer, who deals with it with a party of other people helping her on the way. And if you don't know, that's Brenda Driscoll, not our Brenda. So we account for the gifts. It's a good thing to do. Notice that the people who were there responsible for the money had all proved their faithfulness and trustworthiness prior to this. You need to make sure, checks and balances again, you need to make sure that the people who you sent with the gift are trustworthy people and can be trusted to do these things. That's why, in this particular church, I always make sure I get a counter-signatory when I count the offering. And someone else has checked the money as well in case I can't add it up straight, or to make sure that nothing's gone in my back pocket. And similarly, Chaz, our treasurer, presents accounts to us all every month. The whole church is entitled to see these things because they're records that all church members are entitled to see. And between us, we try and make sure that everything is done in order before not just God, but before men as well. That is important. And the church meeting and the deacons have this responsibility within our own church. Notice also that back in the first reading that we had here, Paul invites the church to send their own scrutineers as well. The church who's done the giving. That's perhaps helpful too. So then, let's move on. How is the gift to be used? Well, we don't know. We're not told what the gift is to be used for. We're told in Acts that Paul went to Jerusalem with the gift and with all these other guys, but we're not told what they used it for. We can only assume that it was used wisely for the good of the Lord and for the benefit of the church here in Jerusalem. So to some extent, when we give our money, we have to trust that the student recipients will use it for God's glory. I mean, I've no idea the ins and outs of what happens to all the money that goes to Samaritan's Purse. I know that £5 is a very good deal. I will tell you what it is used for. It is used firstly to run the operation here in this country. It's used to pay the permanent staff, people without whom the place couldn't possibly work. It's used to pay the expenses of volunteers should they choose to claim their expenses. It's used to transport the boxes, to hire the vans, to do all the paying all the petrol and diesel and everything. It is used for that purpose. It's used for the ships and the lorries, which are used to transport the thing over to where they're going. It's also used at the far end, and here's where we have trust in the other people that we're belonging to. We can't keep a look on everything. But it is used also, and we've seen the team out in Moldova, but they actually have a team of volunteers in Moldova and in the other countries where the boxes are sent, which mirror our team here. Our job is to gather the boxes from the volunteers and the donors into a central place and make sure they're all sent off. Their job in Moldova and Ukraine and other places like that is to take a lorry full of boxes and decide, according to their understanding of what God's will is, where those boxes are going to go in that country. There's never enough. There's never enough. Where in the country they're going to go, and to organise the distribution events such as the Queens of Witness. And also, if people want, they can use it to run the Greatest Journey Bible study course, which some of us are already familiar with. And through that course, which is only attended by people whose parents have agreed to it, and Brenda and I have actually been at a class, and the parents have been sitting on one side of the room while the children were doing their Bible study in the other, because it was minus 10 degrees outside, and they aren't going to want to walk away from them they had to. So yeah, it is properly accounted, and that is where it goes. And £5 a go, actually, It's a very small amount to give all that. The Americans have just put their donation up to $10. And at current exchange rate, that's probably, what, £8.5, something like that. We're only asking £5, and it is all used wisely. And it is all accounted for. So don't be afraid to put it in. Thank you for those of you who have paid so generously for the transportation of this particular box. We're not told what the gift is to be used for, but we trust the people that it will be used for God's glory. There are just a couple of general principles regarding giving which I think are important for us to use. Firstly, God has made us responsible for the use of 100% of our income. Some of it we have little or no control over. We have very little control over what we pay in taxes. We have the ability in this particular country, which is denied in many places in the world, to put a cross in a box once every 5 years to determine how the things will be done, and which government is going to be responsible for it. But of course there's always going to be that odd curveball like COVID and Vladimir Putin's war, which throws things completely out of kilter. We suddenly find that things aren't quite as we would have liked them to be. But God has made us responsible for the use of all of it. Some of it we have little or no control over, but God has made us stewards of the rest. What are we doing with the rest of the money that God has given? Remember that when we look back at that, we're supposed to give according to what we have been given and what we have left. We're not supposed to give out of what we don't have. We only are entitled or only are obliged to give out of what we have control over. And if we have been given money to be controlled, often, so we have the responsibility as good stewards of the money to use it. God has given us all of it to use for his kingdom, but some of it he allows us to use for ourselves. And that is to be used wisely as well. I'm reminded of Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus said in chapter 6, verse 32, that God knows what we need. He knows what we need, and he provides for us. Might not seem like that sometimes. Martin Lewis, in his Money Show, always encourages people to keep back 2 months' worth of bills, just in case. Well, I can tell you, having once in a time been out of work for 3 months, that 3rd month gets a bit awkward. But we are responsible for what we are given. And God knows what we need and provides for us. What do we do with the rest? Thank you for those who have given so generously towards the Shoebox appeal. The money will all be used wisely, the boxes will all get to where they're supposed to go. Our children will be blessed. And hopefully many will come to know the Lord along with their parents through this work. That's why I do it. It's nice to see a smile on children's faces, but what gets me out of bed is the thought they might hear about Jesus. I hope that's what gets you into bed as well. Thank you.